Well, welcome everybody. This is Chris from National Parents Organization. I'm here with Dr. Harman today. She's a researcher from Colorado State University and is heavily involved in shared parenting. And she's here today to talk to us about the ICSP conference, the International Conference for Shared Parenting, and also a little bit about her latest research. So, welcome, Dr. Harman, and thank you for coming on and talking to us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So,
So,
tell me a little bit about what's this conference coming up that's the International Conference for Shared Parenting?
yes, it's the annual conference that the ICSP, which is the acronym for it, hosts every year. This year, it was supposed to be in Vancouver in the spring, but due to COVID, we had to kind of shift gears. And so it'll be a virtual conference the beginning of December. I can I can share a link for it too. So anybody who's watching, if you're interested in going attending, you can join. It's free and it'll be live streamed, and so you'll be able to see all the presentations, and there'll be some great opportunities to network as well. There's live hallway chats that are going to be online where you can pop into different virtual rooms and chat with other attendees on different topics. And even just talk about or debate things that you've heard in presentations just before these chat rooms. And so it'll be an exciting event. The theme of the event is the intersection of family violence and shared parenting, because the president of ICSP had asked me to serve as a scientific co-chair to select talks and presentations that could help bring a dialogue to the topic of family violence and how do we address shared parenting, advocacy, and the work that's being done in the shared parenting area, while also addressing concerns about family violence and protecting children. And historically, those have been kind of very polarized fields with people who are working to kind of promote their own agendas. And our goal was to try to bring everybody together and see what we all have in common and how can we protect children while also doing and promoting services and policies that we know benefit children, such as equal access to healthy parents, right? So that's kind of the intent of the conference, and we're very pleased with the program. There's speakers kind of with very different opinions that are going to present, and we wanted it that way. We wanted it where it's an opportunity to bring all these ideas to the table, bring everyone's concerns to the table, so that we can have a more interesting and well-rounded dialogue.
Well, that's fantastic, and I think it's important that we start having that conversation around domestic violence and shared parenting because, at least I know from my experiences when advocating for shared parenting, the folks on the other side that are against it always bring up the domestic violence argument. But
Mhm.
I think a lot of people, who are pro shared parenting, see the domestic violence will get, the rates will go down as you have more shared parenting. It's sort of a long term fix, I think, to the issue. Is that kind of how you see it, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there are a lot of valid concerns on both sides of this argument, right? I think there's a lot of misunderstandings even on how to assess and treat domestic violence and child abuse. There's a lot of misunderstandings about how to treat parental alienation, which is an area of research that I focus on. Just a lot of misunderstandings about what they are, misunderstandings and miseducation or poor education around the dynamics and things that create it. And unfortunately, then those things create problems and outcomes for children that understandably make people, I think, hesitant to want to say, hey, let's promote shared parenting when there might be abuse, right? But if we can all maybe find ways that we say, how can we better assess and protect children, and at the same time have a presumption of shared parenting that is rebuttable in cases where there's violence, right? So that's this rebuttable assumption idea, where if we can find ways to ensure that children are protected when there is family violence, then we don't have to worry as much about putting children in the care of two healthy parents, right? They don't have to be competing agendas at all. And so, I think the important thing is trying to find the common ground And that entails being able to listen to the concerns of other people. And we're hoping that the conference will be an opportunity for that to happen.
Well, that's fantastic. And so, tell me a little bit more about the conference. Is it really just for academics, or is it for people that are interested in shared parenting? Is it more for the lay people? What's a good representation of who's going to be there?
Well, the interesting thing about the International Council on Shared Parenting is it's the whole mandate or the whole kind of design of it is to include not just research or and mental health and legal practitioners, but also just the civil society. So there's a whole branch of people who are just parents or other people who are interested in this topic but aren't professionals working in that area. And so there's talks that are kind of targeting everybody. There's some sets of talks on advocacy. There's some that are just on kind of current state of research. There's some on legal issues and trying to understand kind of how different countries are dealing with family violence and policy. So there's a whole range of different topics. The way it's organized is that we have about 30 plenary speakers, which is a lot for a conference. And those are standalone talks of invited speakers. But then we also have simultaneously in different times sets of workshops where there are several sets of talks organized around kind of common ideas that were submitted by people who wanted to present either research or opinions and different ideas that they had. And so we have several of those operating, and there's even 2 workshops that are running that are live that you can attend. One of them is I forget the person's name. I have to look at the program, but they're going to bring in a panel of parents who've been alienated from their children and reunited, and talk about what that was like. And so it'll be a really neat kind of live conference. Most of it will be streaming videos that have been pre-recorded. And then at the end of each of the talks, there's a live moderated discussion. So it's a kind of a mix, like a hybrid of live and recorded sessions. And the reason we did that is because there's speakers from all over the world who are presenting. We have speakers from Italy and Brazil, the U.S., all over. And so we wanted to make sure that the stability of the internet was was not a problem, and that everybody can get some high quality content. We even have speakers from Iran, and so I think it'll be a really diverse set of opinions, and from people from South Africa and different all parts of the world. So.
Well, that's fantastic, and I think here in the States we sort of live in our own bubble, right? We sort of forget that there's the rest of a whole world out there. But shared parenting certainly is taking hold across the world, and I think it's fantastic to see all these different people come together, really with pretty much the same message, right?
Yeah, very similar. I mean, people have different opinions about whether there should be a legal presumption or not.
Right.
But and here's where I think the discussion and dialogue will be really interesting. Like if there was to be a legal presumption,
Mm-hmm.
what would need to be in place? What would
Right.
make people comfortable? And
Mm-hmm.
that's where it's important, I think, to approach this with an open mind. And
Absolutely.
it's hard, and I understand why it's really hard for sometimes people to do that when
Yeah.
it's an emotional topic, and it can be it's been historically polarizing and other things. And it's as a scientist, I pride myself on trying to be as objective as I can and try to step back
Mm-hmm.
and take my emotions out of out of what I'm looking at. But I know that that's not the case for everybody, especially if it's something that's affecting you personally. It's hard to do that.
Are you going to be presenting at the conference, or are you just attending?
Yes, I'm presenting as part of one of the plenary sessions. There's a section on parental alienation. So, current research, treatment, and intervention. And so there's 4 of us speaking in that section. Dr. Bill Burnett's going to be speaking. Um, I'm speaking. Dr. Mandy Mathewson is presenting from Australia, and Ashish Joshi, who's an attorney who specializes in litigating parental alienation cases. And he's going to present an international law perspective on that.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, that'll be a nice set of talks. And so, but yeah, and so each of the plenary sessions are kind of organized on different themes, just like
Hmm.
the workshops are. And so yeah, so my talk will be in that section.
Well, yeah, certainly anybody who's interested in shared parenting at all, it sounds like this is going to be a fantastic resource for them to join and learn and be part of the discussion.
Yeah, definitely.
That's awesome. So tell me a little bit about your research and how did you get started on researching families and shared parenting and that sort of thing. Where's your genesis and all this and where is it taking you?
Well, I've always studied close relationships and intimate relationships since I was in graduate school back in 2000. That's when I started. I've been at Colorado State University as a professor. I'm now an associate professor. I've been there since 2005, and I've always studied close relationships and like the power dynamics and trying to understand how people can influence each other in relationships to do good or bad things. And it wasn't until probably about 8 or 9 years ago that I really became interested in the study of family violence. I had published some papers on domestic violence and other things and studied that, um, like more intimate terrorism, and that kind of violence, which is battery, that kind of violence. But then I started becoming interested in the topic of parental alienation, largely because I've seen it happen to a lot of people close to me. And then when my husband and I got married, we were dealing with that as well. So I kind of know, and I was shocked as somebody who'd studied close relationships and intimate relationships my whole career. I was shocked that had never learned anything about that. No one I'd never read a study on it. I'd never been exposed to anything that explained what it was that we were experiencing. Everything I had read didn't make any sense. It didn't apply to our experience. And then I came across what it was, but that, some of the classic work by Dr. Amy Baker and other people. And I was like, oh my gosh, how could somebody like myself, who's a scientist in this area, not know anything about this? And so it kind of spurred me to want to learn more about it. And so I reached out actually to a colleague of mine who had published a few papers on parental alienation, and she's at my university. In fact, she's a floor above me in the building where I work. And I had actually served with her on several graduate student committees, for their dissertation and master's thesis proposals and things. And she and I had never really talked about her work on parental alienation. And so I reached out to her and I said, I really think we should, you know, collaborate on some work, because there's, especially a lot of the work that I saw had been done in the area was mostly in clinical areas or legal approaches to the problem. And I'm a social psychologist, which is different than clinical psychology. And so, in other words, I approach things kind of more from understanding how people influence each other, and how societies and groups and other things influence individuals. And so and I kept seeing that a lot in these cases where there's parental alienation. You can see a lot of influence of a parent on a child. You see the use of therapists and courts and other things in order to get advantage, right? And custody. And this is where custody comes in too. And why, even though the crux of my research isn't on shared parenting, but custody and the amount of time parents have with children definitely impacts um, the quality of the relationship and the ability of the person, alienating parent, to be effective, right? And so there's definitely an intersection of my research with shared parenting research. And so that's sort of how I got into it. And so we started collaborating, my colleague and I, Dr. Zainab Buringen, and we wrote a book on it. Then we interviewed almost 100 parents around the world, just to kind of get a better sense of what their experiences have been like, which then kind of served as an impetus for a lot of research questions that I've been tackling. And so since I started doing this work, I've pretty much almost published about a dozen papers just in the last few years, in peer-reviewed journals, and we wrote a book and have a few book chapters. I just finished an encyclopedia entry for for a publisher. So it's been taking off. All my research, and I have like so many projects I'm working on right now. It's my head spins half the time when I'm trying to explain what I'm working on, but it's been exciting. It's been an exciting road.
It
So
certainly sounds like it. So, where's the future taking you? Is there any brand or specific area of the research that you're going to focus on? Is it going to be the conflict, or the domestic violence, or the shared parenting, or all of that together?
well, so part of it, the research questions really kind of depend on what's most pressing at the moment, right? So I published my first few papers kind of in this area, was really trying to get a grasp on how common it is. So I published a few papers on prevalence. And so, but then now that I kind of have a sense of that, I've moved on. So I've been looking and trying to understand it from the perspective of parental alienation being a form of family violence, which means it includes not just child abuse, but also domestic violence. Because the strategies and the behaviors that a parent uses to try to harm the relationship between another parent and their child are also intended to harm the other parent. They're
Right.
intended to
Yep.
hurt them, which by definition is domestic violence. Now, whether it raises to the level of violence, that's debatable. I know some people don't agree with that, but that's the same thing with child abuse. How bad does it have to be before it rises to a level in which you consider it something you need to intervene with, right?
Right.
And the same thing I think, with parental alienation. But it doesn't mean that it's not still considered violence if it's severe enough, right? And so that's sort of been the crux of a lot of my work, trying to understand what kind of violence we're talking about, because there's two basic kinds of family violence if you kind of categorize them. One is a bit more like intimate terrorism, where you have one person who's more powerful. They tend to be more pathological or have
Hmm.
some trauma in their lives that leads to their behaviors. You see cycles of abuse. But then another kind of violence is more reciprocated, where you have two people who have similar levels of power and they just use aggression as like a means to an end. It's a very different kind of pattern. And parental alienation, in my work so far, resembles more battery or intimate terrorism, because you have a power difference between the parents. It's usually very patterned behaviors with intent to harm and kind of consolidate power, similar to what a batterer does. And so that's kind of where a lot of my research is focused on, trying to understand that better and try to provide test whether there's empirical support for that idea. And so far, there has been. And I've also been now focusing on research that um, kind of designed to replicate some other studies that have been done by people who are critics of parental alienation research.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, to see whether or not the findings that they are claiming can be replicated and supported. And because that's the basis of science. You don't just do one study and move on.
Right. Yeah.
The idea is you want to have it transparent and replicable, meaning that can you show that you find this again? Can you find it again using different measures? Can you find it again using different populations? And if you can, then you can have more confidence that what was found is true, right? And so my colleague, Dr. Demosthenes Lorandos, and I just had a paper accepted for publication. I'm going to be talking a little bit about this at the conference. But where we tried to replicate a study that has been getting a lot of media attention by Joan Meyer, who's a kind of a fierce critic of parental alienation work. She's made claims that parental alienation is just a claim that abusive fathers make to get out of child abuse claims, or they say that, oh, I'm being alienated in order to get out of being accused of sexual abuse, for example. And so she did a study where they reviewed appellate court cases where parental alienation was found or alleged to have been found. And we found about 30 major methodological flaws with the study, like bad flaws in terms of how the sample was selected, who did the coding, how they defined their codes, how they analyzed their data. There were a lot of concerns, and we tried to reach out to her, my research team, to get information from her about how she did what she did, and she didn't give it to us. So we had to essentially construct the study based on the limited information that was provided in the paper that they published. But needless to say, we did our own independent study, and we designed it in order to overcome the problems that we identified with her study. And it took us about 9 months to finish. We finished it this summer, wrote it up, and it was just accepted for publication. And I can kind of at least tell you here, it should be in print soon once we get the final kind of copies to review. But we didn't find any support for the hypotheses that she claimed. She claimed that mothers were losing custody more than fathers, and that whenever mothers claimed that they were being abused, that they were more likely to lose custody, and that even when the dad was found to be abusive. That's what she claimed she found in her study, and we did not find that at all in our study. In fact, we found fathers lost custody more than mothers, even when the mom was abusive, or found to be abusive by someone. We found that alienating parents, so parents who had been found by either a psychologist or a custody evaluator or the court to have actually alienated their children, they were the most likely to get decreases in parenting time or lose custody of their children, more so than if a person just alleged that they were being alienated.
Hmm.
Meaning, like, if somebody just got up and said, "I'm being alienated," it's not, the courts weren't just agreeing with that, right?
Well,
Or,
that's good.
yeah, I mean, so they are being discerning. I mean, I think there's hope in that the courts and other people are saying that, you know what, this is not good for children. And if you're doing this to your child, you will have a decrease in custody or lose custody because it's harmful. And they're discerning about it. So I think that's kind of the biggest take home message, that it's just not that you can't just throw it out there as a claim and expect it to be believed. Just like if somebody claims that they're being abused, you can't just automatically assume that it's true. I mean, it goes both ways, right? And so, I mean, certainly there's people who do that, who get up there and claim, "I'm being abused" or "I'm being alienated," and it's not true. Or they're maybe misinformed about what those mean. But the good news is, it seems as if at least our findings indicate that the courts aren't just taking everything at face value, right? And they're looking through these cases very carefully. They're not handing kids over to abusive parents. They're not taking
Right.
custody and putting them in the hands of an active abusive parent. Active
Which
and
is their job, right? I mean, that's what they're there for. So
Right.
it's good to hear that they're doing their job. Was this was the basis of this study all from one singular state, or was it across multiple states?
It's across all states and U.S. territories.
Okay.
So we had almost 1,000 cases, so 958 or something like that
So
cases.
that's a pretty good sized data set then.
Yeah, and they're appellate cases, because what's interesting about the United States is we don't require trial level courts to publish their findings.
Right.
They only have to publish appeals, and so in a lot of ways, the results are kind of limited in that respect, because not everybody can afford an appeal, right? So we
Right.
don't know what's happening at the trial level. Right now, we're in the process of doing the same study. We've added a few more hypotheses that we're testing, but we're looking at Canada because they do publish trial level cases. And so we are in the process now. We have a research team who we're doing exactly kind of the same study that we're doing now. We're looking at a few more variables because at the trial level, there's a lot more detail about
Right.
what's going on,
Yeah.
and like a lot more things about what the kids are saying, what they're doing, and what the parents are doing. And so we're doing that now. I also have a colleague who's down in Australia, and they're doing independently their own test of the same hypothesis, looking at Australian cases. So so it's exciting that there's independent labs also replicate or trying to replicate or see if we can replicate the findings that Meyer found, and so far we didn't. Um, but we'll see. I mean, it's important to really get good answers to that, so that way we're not, making policy decisions and other things that are based on bad research. So.
Yeah, so hopefully in a couple of years you'll come back to the conference for international shared parenting and give us an update on what's going on with that same study around the world. I think that's fantasy, or it's I think that's really interesting to see. Basically if you get the same result in different countries and different cultures and things like that.
Oh yeah,
So,
yes, definitely.
and you have a book out, Parents Acting Badly.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about the book, and I'm going to bring it up here on the screen so everybody can see it.
Okay. Well, that was actually the book that I wrote with Zainab Berenjen, or Dr. Berenjen. That was our kind of first foray into this area. This was kind of when I first started kind of pulling together all the research, trying to get a grasp about what do we know about parental alienation. And then in the later chapters, we present our opinion about kind of more social factors that might be contributing to the problem. Like, why is it getting so bad? Because a lot of
Right.
people are like, is it just getting worse? And Dr. Amy Baker and I have actually had this discussion. Is it really getting worse, or is it just that we're actually identifying it? And I don't know necessarily if it's getting worse or not. I mean, because we find alienation all over the world. Parental alienation study group, which is another kind of organization designed for parents and professionals who work in this area. Um, we have members from all over the world. I mean, almost every country. We just got a new member from Kenya. I mean, so it's everywhere. It looks a little bit different in different countries and different cultures. For example, in Iran, fathers are more likely to be the alienating parent, and they're more likely to get custody of their children because it's a different culture. Whereas in the U.S., there's always been this sort of moms are best, kind of approach that's been taken, and moms get custody more than dads. So in different cultures, it can look very different. I work with a lot of students who are from China, and they tell me alienation is rampant there, but the divorce isn't. So
Oh.
there's people who are living in families, especially extended families, because they're larger family groups who live together, and alienation's there, but they don't leave the relationship because there's not a strong cultural norm for divorce.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting on how it plays out in other cultures, but it's still present. It's still there. So yeah.
Well, that's fantastic, and I mean, it's really interesting to me that we see across the world. Like I said before, I think in the United States we tend to forget there's other countries out there sometimes, and we have unique problems, but we really don't have unique problems. They're really the same problems everywhere else. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting to see how the science really speaks to the issue across cultures, and I mean, because people are people, right, at the
And I
fundamental
think
level.
that will probably actually really be the take home message if you attend the ICSP conference. I always find them really interesting to hear what's going on, and especially a lot of the European countries and how they're handling things. And it's so different from Italy to Sweden, for
Right.
example. And I was at a conference in a few years ago in Sweden. I was presenting there, and there was an interesting panel of presenters from Sweden, Norway, and Finland.
Mm-hmm.
And here I thought, oh, they probably all have similar problems because they're all, northern. Oh, and Iceland was also present. So they're all these, Nordic countries, but they were all completely different. Like the way Sweden was handling things was totally different than Finland. And I was shocked because I didn't know, and the way that their legal system handles issues is very different than in the US, because they just have a different system of inquiry. So you here in the U.S. you have two attorneys and you both present your case, and you can hire your own experts. You can, for better or worse, you're having to battle it out like that. Whereas over there in Sweden, the judge decides whether or not they're going to have an expert. If you're going to have an expert decide something, the judge picks who it is. You don't have
Okay.
So it's a very different thing. And
Hmm.
if you have for example, in Stockholm, they outsource it to their, I guess, the equivalent of child protection services.
Right.
Those staff don't understand alienation at all. And so when it's outsourced to that to come up with an assessment, the parent who's dealing with it has no recourse. They can't go out and hire somebody separate to go and combat that opinion. So it's a different set of challenges that people in other parts of the world are dealing with. But I think it is useful to kind of then look at some countries and say, wow, they're doing it better than us, or that's an
Hmm.
interesting idea. Why don't we think of that way, that approach, so and it's interesting, to see kind of how shared parenting work in the Mediterranean, and even Germany is different than the UK, so it's I think if you all attend, you'll find it really fascinating.
Well, we certainly look forward to seeing you at the conference, and we encourage everybody to join the conference and get the most out of it. Get all the information you can and learn as much as you can. And how can folks get a hold of you or see your work outside of the ICPS?
Or ICSP, yeah.
Sorry,
Uh,
yeah.
that's okay. I know it's kind of an awkward acronym. So let's see. I'm trying to think of where I do have a website, a personal website, where I kind of post updates on publications and other things. It's just my full name, Jennifer Jill Harman at gmail or at .com. Yeah, jenniferjillharman.com. Sorry. And then I sometimes post. I'm at Colorado State University, so my website at the university also has kind of more recent updates on work. Um, I'm trying to think of, I guess I do have some social media outlets. I've actually decided to cut social media predominantly for
Hmm.
my own sanity. So,
Sure.
but I do, sometimes we'll post things on Simply Parent, which is there's a Facebook group called Simply Parent. It's part of a nonprofit that I'm on the board of directors for,
Okay.
and so I'll post kind of updates there. Um, yeah, so
All right. Well, we'll be sure to post those links along with this video, so if people are interested, they can just click the link and get a hold of you there. But thank you so much for coming on and telling us about the conference and about your research. And it's really interesting to see, how this all pulls together, and how it's really not just a micro problem here in the United States. It's all over the world. So thank
right.
you so much for the work that you do and for joining us today.
Okay, thank you. All
We'll see
right.
you later. Thank you.